Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Dorota and I would like to welcome you again to our Versus Monday series. We did have a little bit of break with recordings because of Christmas and New Year's, so I hope that everybody had a good time during that period, and let's keep fingers crossed that we will have a better year for diving this year. But as we continue with the series, what I would like to talk today about is regulators. So I would like to compare a configuration that we would call a GUI configuration of regulators that contains a long hose, which I will explain what it is and how we use it a little bit. So I will refer to that type of regulators as long hose regulators, and then I will compare it to a regular set of regulators, which I will use the name for them regular or non-GUI configured regulator. So what I would like to start with is that it's kind of obvious why we do have regulators, because first of all we need to have gas to breathe from, and regulator is the one that delivers the gas to us for breathe, and the other reason for having that is to be able to donate or share gas with our teammate in case they would have an out of gas emergency, so they will run out of gas or low on gas. And I will cover that discussion in that perspective. So first of all I will cover a little bit of what the configuration is and what from a perspective of streamlining as well. And then the other one, I will compare how those sets of regulators would be used in an emergency situation, and then decide which one has which benefits or disadvantages. So let's introduce first the regulators itself. So there's two sets, where the first one I would like to briefly discuss is the standard regulator set, which means a first stage with two second stages, of which one of them is called an octopus. And then we have as well an SPG or a console and a hose that is used for inflating the BC. And with that set of regulators, there is no standardization in regards of how long the hoses are. And then you might have a different variety. You can have 80 centimeters, you have 1 meter hoses, you might have them shorter, longer. The configuration itself might be varying, and this I will explain a little bit later on when I will be talking about gas donations. So then we have this standard regular regulator set. And then we have the GUI configured or a long hose regulator set, where the main distinction is that some length of hoses is really strictly standardized. We do have there a long hose, which comes on a hose that is between 1.5 meters to 2 meters long. And I will explain why there is this range as well a little bit later. We do have our secondary second stage, so our so-called backup on a relatively short hose that is hanging under the diver's neck on a bungee. Then we have an SPG, of course, but in this type of regulator set we do have only the SPG. There is no console that contains more items, so it's only the SPG. And then we have, of course, the same inflator that would be used to inflate the BC. What we will be talking about now is some pros and cons, because it's a Versus Monday. So first let's talk about streamlining, because this is one of the major parts that I would like to cover. And let's start with a regular regulator set, which means a set with non-standardized length of the hoses, because the hoses are the main factor that really distinguishes these two setups. So if you look at the standard regulator set, because of the length of the hoses and because how they are positioned on the diver, they create loops around the diver that are not creating a very nice streamlined profile for the diver. If you compare it to a GUI configured regulator set or a long hose set, even if the long hose is really long, because I said it could be, or it is most of the time 2 meter long hose, the way it is placed on a diver creates much nicer and much more streamlined profile. So now what it is with the streamlining, what does it really change for the diver? So first of all, if you have everything really nicely snug on your body, you will have no loops or no equipment that potentially could catch things. So this for sure is one of the environmental impacts that you might or might not have, because a dragging console or sticking out regulator hose may catch things. So it's not only environmentally more friendly to have more streamlined profile, but it as well is more safe, because if you are inside a wreck, if you are inside a cave, or if you are swimming close to objects, if you have loops around, they will act as hooks that you can hook yourself on, and then it can not create entanglement per se, but you can get entrapped, because then you get stuck with the hose somewhere because it's just sticking out of the contour of your body. So this would be the second thing. So first would be the environment damage that you could potentially do, then it could be the entrapment with these hoses. And the third thing, even though you might think a hose is a quite tiny piece of equipment and it doesn't create a lot of surface, it still creates quite a lot of drag. So if you are swimming against a strong current, or if you want to move quickly and efficiently through the water, having those hoses sticking out as loops will really make a difference. So that's why, from our perspective as GUI divers, we would like to have everything nicely snug and nicely fitting. So there is nothing that is sticking out too much out of our profile or a contour of our silhouette, that we can move in the water much more efficiently. Another very, very specific feature for the GUI configurated regulators is its standardization. And by standardization, I really mean quite precise definitions on how long the hoses should be and where they should be placed. The length of the long hose is really precisely defined, and you will find the lengths in our standards, in GUI standards, where we do define how long the hoses should be. The other hoses, they are a little bit more flexible, because their length will depend a little bit of the size of the diver. It will a little bit depend on the hose routing, which relates very often to the type of the first stage that we have, but they have as well ranges. So it's not that you might have whatever length, you just need to first follow the standards that we have, and then to see which length of the hose would allow me to most streamlined profile that I can get, but as well that it's functional, because I cannot have the hoses too short and then I cannot manipulate them or they restrict me. So this would be a very specific standardization for GUI type of regulators, whereas the other type of regulator doesn't have it. The only thing that is somehow regulator is which hoses there should be, like on all of the regulators, and as well that the alternative gas source, most of the time called an octopus, should be longer, because this would be the regulator that you donate. So you would like to have a little bit of space between the receiver and the donor in an emergency situation that I will come to next. What I have covered for now is a regulator use, like regular use, regular regulator use. But what I covered is streamlining, so how the hoses are positioned on the diver, and I covered a little bit of the standardization concept, that one is more standardized, the other is less standardized. But now I'm coming really to the core of the difference, because the first function of the regulator is just to allow divers to breathe from, but the second one is to be able to donate gas in an emergency situation where the other diver is running out of gas or low on gas. And here are the main differences between them. So let's talk first about the non-GUI configurated regulator, because they offer a variety of different options how you can handle situation of out of gas. So first of all, I mentioned already that this set of regulators have something that is called an alternative gas source or an octopus, and most of the time it should be positioned somewhere in this triangle, so between diver's chin and then the ribs, and it should be somewhere here. The idea with this triangle is that it tries to introduce some form of standardization, that if a diver in need would look for an alternative gas source, he will just look into that area. So then he will kind of aim to find things in that area. So this is the piece of standardization that this type of regulators will bring. But most of the time, the regulators are configured in a way that the diver will breathe from his primary regulator, which is on a shorter hose, so it doesn't create a huge loop here on the side. And then he will donate, in a situation of out of gas, this octopus regulator, which is on a longer hose. And now this might introduce a little bit of an issue, because very often what I have seen, because I have been using those types of regulators before as well, what I have seen that people tend to have these octopuses, so these alternative gas sources, in a little bit poorer quality. It was a little bit simpler, it was a little bit less quality, it's sometimes as well cheaper, because people think, well, I will not really use it very often, because most of the time, to be honest, people are not running out of gas underwater, and the fact that you donate is not really very common occurrence. So people tend to have those regulators not really used. So most of the time people will not check if they are working correctly, because they most of the time will care about the regulator they breathe from. So now if we are going into a situation that I would donate this, I would really like to be sure that it's properly working and it's a good regulator, because I'm helping somebody out who is in an emergency and he is stressed and he just ran out of gas. So I would like to donate him something that I'm sure that is really working and is working well. So this might be a little bit of a disadvantage point for this type of configuration, when divers are not really taking care about those octopus regulators, or they might not be even aware what consequence it can bring in an actual out-of-gas situation. The other option that divers are being taught in that configuration, that they will not donate, or they will not allow the diver to take the alternative gas source, that they will donate their primary regulator and then they will switch to this alternative gas source. So it's another combination that can be used. The other thing that is as well taught is that you can share your primary regulator and do alternative breathing, which means so-called body breathing, where the divers are switching the regulators between themselves and they are breathing from the main primary regulator. So they are kind of alternating breathing and then managing the situation in that way. There is as well another option that I have seen and I have as well used myself, is that you might have an additional regulator integrated into your inflator, where you can breathe from it, and then you can donate your primary regulator, or you can donate your alternative gas source, this octopus, to somebody else. So now if you look at this, you might think that having so many options to react in an emergency situation is nice, because if one doesn't work, the other one will work. And if this is not the correct solution, I will have another one. But to be honest, in an emergency situation, I would like to have only one way to go, because then if I start to think which option I should use, or if I start to have doubts how the other diver was trained, should I give him this one or that one, or will he grab this on his own, and I should give it to him, this creates additional level of complications that in such a situation we do not want to have. So on one hand, it might seem, wow, there are so many options on how I can handle this emergency, but on the other hand, it's like, wow, I have so many options to handle that emergency, and it might be a little bit overwhelming, and it might be actually not helping. Let's switch now to a GUI configurated regulators, or a long hose regulators, and explain a little bit how do they work in an emergency. And again, I need to make a disclaimer here. I'm diving this type of regulators. I would not switch to another set, so I might be biased, but I will try to be as honest as possible to show the advantages and disadvantages, if there will be any for that. So first of all, the first idea with the regulator configuration is that we are donating what we are breathing, and we are breathing a long hose. So we are breathing the one that has 2 meters, that is 2 meters long. So first of all, why we decided to donate the regulator that we are breathing from? So first of all, most of the people that will have an emergency out of gas, they will run or they will go for gas and they will aim to get the regulator that they see is working. And if I'm breathing that regulator, the diver who is in need will see, okay, he is breathing from it, so it's working. The second thing is, for sure, it will be a well-performing regulator because I'm breathing it most of the time. So 99.9% it's me breathing from it. So I would like to have this regulator really properly serviced and a well-performing regulator. So then the diver who is in need will be sure, okay, I will get something that really works and works well. The other thing is that it's very easy to find because it's just in my mouth. There is no options, okay, what should I look for to donate, because I'm just donating what I'm breathing. So it's always in the same place, it's in my mouth. There is a certain procedure of donating, and of course, because it's a standardized procedure, you need to practice that. And this is one of these disadvantages that you might perceive, that, okay, it's a specific procedure with specific steps I need to practice, but for us as GUI divers, it's not a disadvantage. It's advantage because it forces us to practice that procedure more often, not to forget the steps, and in case the emergency really happens, it just goes smooth. So it's not an emergency, it's more of a routine procedure that we just go through with, instead of kind of having this emergency feeling. So another thing is, with the benefit of this standardization that I just said and this willingness to practice this, is that whatever is being taught in the beginning, so you will learn how to use a long hose and how to donate that hose on the first GUI course that you do. Either it's fundamentals or it's a recreation diver level 1. And this type of donation will grow with you as you go, so you will not change that. So you will always donate the regulator that you breathe, and you will always be breathing the regulator that is 2 meters long, unless it's some more technical dives where you're using stages, but let's not go that path now. So it's really standardized from the perspective of where this regulator is and how it is donated. The other thing which is a benefit from our perspective, which sometimes is perceived as disadvantage when it's not understood, is the hose that I'm donating is really long. So what does it allow me to do is to create a distance between the two divers. And I will come back to that a little bit later, but what I mean with create distance is that if I donated this long hose, if I released it so the full length of the hose is free, I can have the diver conveniently in front of me in a distance that is for both of us convenient to manage the rest of the gear, like our buoyancy. But as well, which is very important, this is from where the length of the hose originated, we might be swimming one after the other. So if we are in a cave with a narrow passage, if we are in a wreck where it's as well a narrow passage, I might have my out-of-gas diver in front of me, and then we can swim out. Because if the length of the hose would not be enough, we would not be fitting into that passage. That's why the length of the hose is as well so precisely defined. Because it doesn't really matter what size the person is, the 2 meter length allows divers to swim in a single file, as we call it, so one after the other out of the restriction, if they would be diving in such. The next thing with this set of regulators in regards of the emergency situation is that we know, first of all, which regulator we donate, and it's always in our mouth, or it's always the longer hose. And the second regulator that we switch to, we always know where it is as well, because it's just under my chin here, hanging on the bungee. You might say, yeah, okay, but it might not be there because potentially you just forgot to put it there. But that's why within GUI we have a specific procedure called GUI Edge that you might check a video about on GUI TV, which the link is up there. So there is a procedure that would not allow us to enter the water without this regulator being in place. Exactly the same way that you would do if you would use a regular set of regulators, because you do have a body check there as well. So this is nothing that I would say is a disadvantage. Now I would like to discuss like 2 more aspects related to the long hose, the length of the hoses, and potentially some argument that people might have against that long hose. So first of all, if you look at GUI standards, we say that the long hose length should be between 2 meters, which is 7 feet, to 1.5 meters, which is 5 feet. So we give a range. So you might say, it's not really so standardized because then you can have one or the other. But the shorter hose, so 1.5 meter or 5 feet hose, is there mostly for a reason if people would decide to use those in an open water environment. Because as I explained, the 2 meter hose is there mainly for the reason that you can exit a narrower space while having somebody on your long hose in front of you swimming one after the other. And this 2 meters would allow these 2 divers to have a distance that it's comfortable to swim like this. So if we are in an open water environment, you might say, okay, it's not needed that I will swim in a single file, because then I will be just in an open water environment. I can position myself anywhere where I want, so I could use potentially a shorter hose, so 1.5 meter long. It is in the standards, but majority of GUI divers will use the 2 meter hose anyway, because what is really very specific for GUI is, of course, standardization, but as well, what you learn on the first course, which kind of comes with you along for all of the other courses. We dislike to unlearn things to learn new things, or to learn things that would require me to add additional steps later along the way. What I mean is that if you do have a 2 meter long hose, you will need to learn from the beginning how to stow it properly. Either it's under the harness or on the light canister that you have on your right hip. So this would be the way we secure the hose from, floating around and being this 2 meter danger that you might get entangled with. So if you are using 1.5 meter, you will not have this need because it will just fit under your arm and it will not be tucked anywhere. So if you would continue with another course, if you'd go to a tech class or if you go to a cave class where this 2 meter hose is necessary, you might need to learn the additional skill of how to tuck and secure the long hose. So from my perspective, and I think most of the GUI divers, they would agree, and instructors as well, that we will always prefer the 2 meter hose, just to have one, and learn from the beginning the handling of the long hose as well. Because it adds a tiny little bit of learning, but it's not really too complicated to learn even from beginners. So I do have experience teaching beginner divers using those 2 meter hoses without really any problem. So even if you find in the standards that there is 2 lengths provided, majority of GUI divers would use the 2 meter hose anyway, because it's even more standardized, because it's only one option then. And then you will learn from the beginning the same procedures that you would use on all of the subsequent classes that you would potentially take. And another thing that I would like to cover in regards of this 2 meter hose is some critique that we sometimes hear, is the statement that I said before, that it allows the divers to have space between them. So it allows the divers in this emergency situation to be a little bit further away so they can handle their own gear. And very often in an emergency situation, what is required or what is told, that if you have a physical contact with the other diver, it will calm him down. So he will feel that there is somebody there who is taking care of me now, and you are holding to the other diver. So most of the time, if you are learning how to donate gas using a regular regulator set, you will be taught to hold on to that diver. Either is you just hold on with your hands, or you grab to his BC, or you just grab his shoulder, and having that physical contact, you start to ascend. And within GUI, we do not have that, because it is firstly related that we hope to train the divers to be self-reliant in regards of controlling the buoyancy. And even if you are out of gas, you still should have the ability to control your buoyancy, because now if you are out of gas, the only way is up or out if you are in a cave or in a wreck. So there will be no changes of buoyancy that you should not be able to handle, because if you are just ascending, you will be releasing gas. You don't need to add, because you might not have anything to add because you're out of gas. So for us, the physical contact is not necessary. We will have physical contact, so we will go into so-called touch contact when we are moving along with the diver. So we need to communicate with him, or we might potentially help him a little bit, but in the case of ascending, we will be in front of each other. We will have that space between us, because then we see each other well, we can recognize what the other divers are doing, and we both will independently control our ascent on the way up. So this is sometimes a critique, how come you are not teaching people to hold on to the diver all the time? And the reason for that is that we believe that the person in an emergency, even if it's an out of gas, should be self-reliant enough that he can handle himself in most of the cases. And that's why we promote training, experience, and practicing those procedures as long or that many times that it becomes really a protocol, a procedure, not an emergency. And I'm coming back again here, like closing the loop again. That's why we so emphasize standardization, because if we have one set of regulators, we always donate in the same way, and the procedure of donation looks exactly the same every single time, there will be no stress, because I will know exactly how I will behave, and I will know exactly how the other person will behave, regardless if I'm in the donor or a receiver position. But for now, I would like to thank you for watching. I hope that you will post some questions and some comments down below in our comment section under this video, because I always like to hear your experiences, and I would like to see what your perspective on the one or the other regulator is, because you might have totally different experiences, and you might enrich our experience and experience of everybody else who is watching with your own comments and questions. So please do post them, and I will try to answer them as quickly as I can. Otherwise, thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.